Far-right podcast host, convicted fraudster, and Trump's first chief strategist in the White House, and who was pardoned by Trump after being convicted for defrauding donors to the We Build the Wall fund, Steve Bannon, the man who was held in contempt of Congress for failing to testify to the January 6th committee, went on Bill Maher's show last weekend, where Bannon called again for a third presidential term for Trump before being brutally mocked by Maher for his complete abandonment of the Constitution and its limitation placed on every American to only serve at most 2 presidential terms. But before we dive in, if you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, don't forget to click the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. Your support means a lot, and it also helps promote these progressive messages to the YouTube algorithm, which helps its amplification to reach even more viewers. So this is particularly juicy for me because, in my contention, Bannon is one of the chief architects of this radical insurgency that's trying to displace the current American form of government that is the political hegemony of the entire world. So I'm a little emotional. So anytime that he is publicly mocked and humiliated, I will 100% be covering it.
And I didn't mind going to prison.
I brought a copy tonight. Here it is, the Constitution. Can I read a passage to you? Amendment 22, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And yet you keep talking about Trump's, maybe you should have this. Here, just put that.
It's just a cold move, okay? Just stone cold move. Here's the Constitution. Just a polite little reminder. This very simple text right here is what you're just throwing out the window for your God Emperor Trump, the Cheeto-in-Chief, Mango Mussolini. You're deciding to throw away this Constitution, this 22nd Amendment that limits presidents to only serving 2 terms, therefore establishing firmly that this country is a democracy, not ruled by a king or an emperor, and instead you're throwing it away and saying to the rest of the world, actually, America isn't what it used to be. It's not upholding these truths that defined it as the current American form of government. No, actually, since Trump is in office, he changes everything. That's what Bannon, this fraudster who was convicted, who just got out of prison, is saying right now. And it makes me so happy to watch him getting publicly mocked, and I hope this goes viral and more people see just how forsaken the state of MAGA is, that are calling for a third-term Trump presidency, completely abandoning the Constitution that, and this 22nd Amendment was established, I think, right after FDR served, so it's almost 100 years old, and they're just like throwing it away because why? They want Trump. They just want Trump. And this is amidst his lowest approval ratings of his entire time in the White House, including his first term, and the stock market that his tariffs have caused to go down by roughly 10% year to date. He's still calling, Bannon is still calling for a third-term Trump presidential term. It's the same with Trump himself. Like, I think that's how you can firmly know that they are trying to change the regime of the American form of government into one that is just suitable for whoever the incumbent is. So if Trump is the incumbent, then he's going to remain the incumbent. He's going to remain the president regardless of what the constitutional limits are. These guys are a radical insurgency. They keep wanting to call the Democrats the radical leftists or whatever. Radical leftists are not trying to displace the American form of government. We're trying to uphold those truths. Actually, uphold the covenant to, a constitutional order that we've had established that makes America this beacon of liberty. But they instead call the radical leftists the betrayers. Satan's considered the great accuser. And I think it's so funny that these MAGA far-right radicals are accusing so many people, especially those Democrats that are risking so much more than any of what they're possibly sacrificing for the country. Instead, they're pursuing their own self-aggrandizing power grab. They're accusing these Democrats who are upholding the Constitution and saying, no, actually, no man should be able to serve more than 2 terms. They're accusing them of being the apostates, the betrayers of American values, when they themselves are the ones doing it. That seems like pretty... If there were such a thing as the satanic opposite of what is something that is defined as good, and in this case, the definition of good for this American form of government would be that there are strictly 2 term limits to the presidency that was established after FDR served 4, because obviously we learned something from a president remaining in office too long. Just what a corrupt fool. They don't... MAGA and people like Bannon, those that are calling for a unconstitutional 3rd term for President Trump, they don't hold anything sacred anymore. The only thing that's sacred to them is power. And they have no qualms or apprehensions of hiding their true form. Trump is obviously always very careful about what he reveals. What he's suggested and intimated and outright said and joked to Congress and Republicans in Congress on many instances that he wants to stay in power past 2 terms. Because, everything's so great when he's president, like, the stock market being down 10% since he took office, him having the lowest approval rating, him deporting people that shouldn't be deported to a El Salvador prison who aren't coming back, apparently. These people are anti-American, okay? This term is thrown around a lot by those in power to try and suppress political opposition, but I'm not in power. Democrats are not in power. So we can say, when these people who are trying to subvert the Constitution, and that's another thing, it's ideological subversion, because the ideology of the American form of government is that there are strict constitutional term limits to the presidency, and Bannon and his ilk are directly challenging that, or trying to destabilize that and normalize something new, which is that, hey, there actually aren't any constitutional term limits that were established nearly 100 years ago. Just complete... I'd go as far as saying that they are godless. They like to call themselves like the part of the Christian right or whatever, but they're forsaking covenants. Chiefly the American Constitution. Yeah, the covenant in the sense of religious and spirituality context is the Bible or the 10 Commandments, but just because the covenant is not from the Bible, but it's actually the strictures of the government that we currently are represented by, that's still forsaking things that are upheld to be true, like in the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Like they're above reproach. They're self-evident truths. All men are created equal. Therefore, there's strict constitutional term limits to how many times a president can serve. And people like Bannon, they just say like, nah, forget that. We're in power. We're not leaving power, and nothing will stop us. Man, I could just keep going about Bannon, and I don't know the words to describe people like Bannon who were convicted, imprisoned for defying a subpoena from Congress, from the January 6th committee, who are trying to determine why our government was attacked on that day, why people died, and he defied them. How do you come up with the correct terms like this? He's trying to subvert the American Constitution and do so with the banner that he's fighting for the good. I mean, I think the words are pretty clear what to describe a person like that. But it's a really, really inflammatory thing to say about somebody. But if we go into the Christian sense, or I mean, not even the Christian sense, it's the Abrahamic religious sense, because Satan is in Islam, the Torah, and Christianity. But that's the only words I can think of it. They're crusading under the banner of good, people like Bannon, and they're actively trying to subvert the current American Constitution, which we've all decided is good. It's what separated America as this beacon of democracy that fights for liberty and justice for all. And he's saying, no, this isn't, that no longer is the superior form of government. The American form of government is no longer superior. Actually, we don't respect the American Constitution, and it's good that we don't. That, to me, is a direct defiance of what we've determined to be good up until this point. And it's not great to say it, but I can't think of a more descriptive term that's more accurate than being the satanic opposite of what is good. If the American Constitution is good, and that means constitutional term limits are good, and it takes, I think, 3/4 of state legislatures to overturn a constitutional amendment, or 2/3 of each chamber of the legislature to overturn it. That is an almost insurmountable thing to do. Or they call a constitutional convention, and they pretty much rewrite the Constitution entirely. You can see how unlikely it seems like that's going to happen, for good reason, because I think the founders of this country that created such a beacon for liberty and justice for all across the world knew that this Constitution has to endure. Above all, it has to endure, the Constitution does. You know? It just makes me sick. They're crusading as they're the good guys. That's what gets me most upset. And I think that's what angered God the most in the Christian sense and maybe Jewish sense. I don't know about the Muslim. That first commandment is, I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. And he says in that first commandment that he is responsible for bringing them out of Egypt, that land of bondage. He mentions that aspect of slavery, being enslaved, I think for good reason, because that means if you forsake that and instead insert something else in there, you become enslaved to another master, not God. Where God is your master before, right? I'm off the deep end. Okay, let's finish this.
I'll get you to sign it backstage and underline. Look, President Trump didn't bring up running for a third term. Myself and others brought up running for a third term. President Trump is going.
That's false. Okay, that's false. Trump has many times intimated that and joked, because it can never be taken seriously, right, that he wants to run for a third term. He did it in front of congressional Republicans. I have a video, and I have a playlist actually devoted entirely to Trump's third term, him calling for it. So go check those out. But he's done it several times. Joked about it, say like, oh, you guys will, if I'm doing so well, you want to keep me around, right? So Bannon saying that it's only him that's been calling for this, that's bullcrap. No. And why would you trust that he's telling the truth? Yeah, he tells the truth sometimes, but you got to remember that with these insurgents, they only use the truth to advance themselves and their own power, okay? So yeah, okay, they're not always lying, all right? Or being dishonest or belying, but almost all the time when they are not telling the truth, they're doing it for their own self-aggrandizement, you know, for their own increase of political power. They'll use falsehood to deceive and gain power that way. They don't care, you know.
Going to run for a third term, and President Trump is going to be elected again on the afternoon of January 20th of 2029. He's going to be president of the United States.
See, right there, you can tell that he doesn't.
Okay, but the thing I just read in there, it seemed like there was no wriggle room there. It seemed like it was just, 8 or 10 words that said only 2 times.
We have a team of people that are working. A team.
How can a team do something about that? What? I don't care if the team is 12 trillion people. The words are still the words.
Bill, every day in federal courts, right now in federal courts, there's 120 lawsuits on what President Trump's doing for his Article 2 rights on the unified executive theory. But he's chief executive, he's commander-in-chief, and he's chief magistrate.
See, he just word salad stuff because he can't back it up, because he knows that the Constitution is pretty dang clear, just like Bill was saying. The only way to ratify that 22nd Amendment that restricts constitutional term limits to the presidency is to have state legislatures, 3/4 of them, ratify it and repeal it, or have 2/3 of each chamber of the legislature do that. And that's, or have another constitutional convention that just rewrites the entire thing. That is insanely implausible to ever happen. So I'm glad that Maher makes a fool of Bannon for being like, oh yeah, we've got a team on this. Oh yeah, a team to somehow figure out how to circumvent the Constitution. That's like, oh yeah, 2/3 of each chamber of the legislature, or 3/4 of the state legislatures, they're the ones that have to repeal it. No, we got a team working on it that'll figure out how to do it. No, there's no team. They're just gonna try and do it. That's it. They're gonna try and do it. They're gonna try. That's the key word, try. In my contention, I don't think it's gonna be anything to do with terminating the Constitution in order to get him to be able to be eligible for a 3rd term. It's not gonna be that. I think they'll keep trying. They'll try, but they're going to fail. And when that does fail, they're going to do the only thing that Trump knows how to do in order to remain in power, like all corrupt leaders do in order to remain in power when their time is nearing an end: start a war. Some type of terror attack. And unfortunately, I feel like that's the most likely scenario of him remaining in office past his congressional 2-term limits of 8 years. But whatever. Bannon's a buffoon.
Chief law enforcement officer. There's 100, and they're running to court every day to sue President Trump, all because the interpretation of this. The interpretation of this is open for interpretation.
How should it be open? Could I have...
Open for... See, open for This is such an insanely ridiculous thing to be saying from Bannon, that this is open for interpretation. It shows in his mind what is the form of government he's trying to establish in place of the current American form of government. And it's more aligned with an autocracy or a dictatorship, because everything in those regimes is open for interpretation. Where here in America, the land of the free, justice for all that good stuff, we have a constitution that's very explicit sometimes, especially with things that are very, very important to the founders and people of America, to liberty, which is like the Bill of Rights or amendments to the Constitution. Like, for instance, the 22nd one that says, hey, no person in America, if you're a citizen of America, can serve as president for more than 2 terms or 8 years. That's not open for interpretation, okay? To people that, like, patriots of America, to the American form of government, that's not open to interpretation, because it clearly establishes that only 2 terms are ever anyone is able to serve. Bannon is a radical insurgent, okay? He does not respect our Constitution. He will lie and say and cheat to do whatever he can to stay in power. His team, his group, to stay in power. It's so weird. No, I'm not going to go there.
But back. How could it, I'm sorry to be... No person, you would agree he's a person. Okay, shall be elected. He was elected to the office. That's the office of the president more than twice. Twice is once and then another time. I don't see what the team is finding.
Okay,
we'll disagree.
Listen, Bill. In 2014, you talk about long odds. In 2014.
Here, listen, Bill. Here's a bunch of stuff that's not going to actually be important at all. I'm just going to blunt you over the head with it, and submit to make you submit, because I know that there's no constitutional argument to actually pushing past 2 terms as serving as a president for Mr. Trump. But here, I'm gonna still do it anyways. Gosh, he's insufferable.
when I backed President Trump when I was running Breitbart. They said I turned Breitbart into Trump Pravda. Okay,
Okay, that was quick, but I wanted to pause on that because he just said something pretty important. They said that he had to be let go from Breitbart News, if you're not, it's a far right media outlet or whatever, because he was turning it into Trump Pravda. Pravda was the first the official newspaper of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union back when Lenin first took power, and it still endures today. You can still find Pravda online. What Pravda translates to is truth. Okay, and in George Orwell, if you read that, they had the government had something called the Ministry of Truth. Okay, once the government starts saying that they are the ministers of truth, okay, or like what Bannon's being accused of turning Breitbart into, Trump Pravda, your ears should really peak up. If you're somebody who believes that government serves the people, not the other way around, But Trump already has his own Pravda. He has his own social media, his media outlet, like Pravda, called Truth Social, which, if you translate Pravda, it literally means truth. Trump already has that. So it's on point that Bannon would be accused of just running Trump Pravda. Because, you know what? He was.
Odds there, he polled at zero. Then later in 2021, after he got back to Mar-a-Lago, when Fox abandoned him and the Murdochs abandoned him, the Republican Party abandoned him, the odds were longer then. So our group, the MAGA movement and the tip of the spear of the MAGA movement, we've had long odds before. You know what? And we've come out winning twice. And we're going to come out, we've got long odds on this. We're going to come out winning a third time. On the afternoon of the 20th of January 2029, he's going to be president of the United States.
Okay. By the way, I did say to him at one point.
Sorry, Steve. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be like that. He's going to get sworn in. How is he going to get sworn in? The Constitution forbids him from serving. How are you going to do it? He still hasn't clearly articulated. He just said some team is working on it. There's no amount of election fraud that's going to be able to do this to say it was stolen from him. He's ineligible. Just like he should be ineligible already for waging an insurrection and leading it. But, we're going to just turn a blind eye. Same with the Supreme Court's going to turn a blind eye to that. But that's a whole nother thing. But the main point here that everyone should take note of, Chomsky calls the GOP a radical insurgency, and I agree, because they don't care about anything except power. They'll go past the constitutional limits whenever they can, whenever it serves them. Then they'll use the Constitution and to uphold it whenever it serves them again. There is no conceivable way for any one American to serve more than 8 years, 2 terms as presidents. Okay, that is per the 22nd Amendment, the first line of the 22nd Amendment. Okay, anyone who is telling you that otherwise is lying to you. Okay, there are 3 ways that they could possibly overturn any constitutional amendment. One, a very, very implausible way, holding a constitutional convention like they originally did to create the Constitution itself from the Articles of Confederation. Okay? The second way is they convene the 2 chambers of the federal legislature and have over 2/3 of the members of there vote for its repeal. Or third, the 3/4 of state legislatures of the country convene and also vote to repeal it. Those are all extremely implausible. Probably not going to happen because we are the most divided we've been, right? So if he's going to be sworn in for a 3rd term, it's not going to be per the Constitution. They're going to have to somehow terminate it, or he's going to just suspend elections because of World War, because that's how FDR served past 2 terms. I sure hope that's not the case, but it seems highly, highly unlikely that they're able to somehow rewrite the Constitution themselves in order to make him eligible again. Thanks for joining. Bannon's a tool, and he's probably lying to you, okay? Thanks for watching.